So good afternoon or evening or morning, depending on where you are tuning in from. My name is Sydney Yeager, and I'm the Senior Public Programs Producer here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's book talk about Einstein and Kafkaland. Here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you so much for joining us today virtually. We hope that if you're able, you will visit the museum in person to see our current exhibitions, including Courage to Act Rescue in Denmark, which is the museum's first exhibition for visitors ages 9 and up. Closed captions are available on today's program, and instructions on how to turn captions on or off are posted in the chat. If you have questions for our speakers during the program, please put them in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. So that is the Zoom Q&A box, not the chat. Today, we are so honored to be joined by Ken Krimstein and Ross Benjamin. Ken is a cartoonist, author, and educator whose work appears in The New Yorker, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, and The Chicago Tribune. His book, Einstein and Kafkaland, How Albert Fell Down the Rabbit Hole and Came Up with the Universe, was published by Bloomsbury in 2024. His 2021 book, When I Grow Up, The Lost Autobiographies of 6 Yiddish Teenagers, has been named an NPR Best Book of the Year, Washington Post Best Book of the Year, and Top 10 Graphic Novel of 2021, and a Chicago Tribune Fall Best Read. His 2018 book, The Three Escapes of Hannah Arendt, won the Bernard J. Brommel Award for Biography and Memoir and was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award. He teaches at DePaul University and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Clarkson Potter published his collection of cartoons, Kvetch as Kvetch Can, Jewish Cartoons, in 2011. His humor writing has been in the New York Observer's New Yorker's Diary and humor websites, including McSweeney's Internet Tendency, Yankee Pot Roast, and Mr. Beller's Neighborhood. He's currently a fellow at the American Academy in Berlin, where he's working on his next book, and also where he's joining us from today. Ross is a translator of German language literature. He received a Guggenheim Fellowship for his translation of Franz Kafka's Diaries and the Helen and Kurt Wolff Translators Prize for Michael Marr's Speak Nabokov. His translation of Daniel Kellman's Tile was shortlisted for the 2020 International Booker Prize. His other translations include Friedrich Holderlin's Hyperion, Joseph Roth's Job, and Kellman's You Should Have Left, and The Director. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Times Literary Supplement, Book Forum, The Nation, and elsewhere. He is co-editor of the Substack Franz, where he regularly publishes new translations of Kafka's complete letters in chronological order. He was a 2003 to 2004 Fulbright Scholar in Berlin. So we have two very accomplished people with us today. And you can purchase Einstein and Kafkaland at the link in the chat. So thank you so much for joining us. And now I'm going to hand things over to Ken and Ross.
Thank you, Sydney.
Thank you.
Before Ross and I get going, I'd like to share my screen and give you all a little introduction into the book. So bear with me while I do this. Yeah. You can see that. Here we go. Okay. Einstein and Kafkaland. And there he is falling down. That's Prague. History is what happens on a rainy Thursday afternoon when nobody is paying attention. Here's a bit about me. I vulgarize history. Now, before you run for the exit, let me tell you about this little story of what happened to me when I was launching my second book in France. I was at a bookstore doing a signing, and someone came up and said, "You are the vulgarizer of history." And I was shocked. And she said, no. In French, vulgariser is good. Bon. It means to make complex stories clear and understandable. Oh, I knew that. Yeah, like hell I did. But actually in French, the verb vulgariser does mean to popularize or simplify complex knowledge, make it accessible to a broader audience. So welcome to my world. I'm a historian, artist, storyteller, cartoonist, and questioner. And I believe that geography is destiny. And I was able to spend about a month in Prague. And these are some pictures of it in the time of Einstein. One of the first things that I learned about cartooning or making these types of graphic novels was this command from the great Charles Addams: subvert the cliche. So in this book, it's not going to be your average Einstein. And as Sydney said, the subtitle, How Albert Fell Down the Rabbit Hole and Came Up with the Universe. It really deals on the lost year of 1911 and 1912. And you see a sketch there of Einstein playing his fiddle and Kafka listening. And during those years, two nobodies rubbed shoulders and became somebodies with results that continue to shake the world. And it all starts with dumb, stupid gravity. Gravity, the most basic thing. You drop something, it falls. Babies know it. My thesis is that Prague is to Einstein what the apple is to Newton. It was where he had his real aha moment. And through the telling of the story, where I'm trying to get into the personality and the people and the humanity of these two, Einstein was 32, Kafka 28, I realized that Einstein, when he was there, had to conquer two monumental fears. One, of course, being a scientist, what if I'm wrong? I mean, what if my ideas on my theory that I need to complete is wrong? But even worse, what if I'm right? The challenge of overturning the universe, even for Einstein at 32, I discovered was daunting. And as for Kafka, let me dive into a little bit of the opening part of the book to give you a sense of it. That's my hand, I'm left-handed. Author's note, this much is true. The world changed, the universe changed, and you changed as a result of the events that followed. This much is also true. All the actual characters depicted were alive and in Prague during the 16 months I described. And all the actual events follow the sequences recorded in letters, diaries, news story speeches, and personal testimonies. As for the non-actual characters and events, the ones perhaps reminiscent of a certain down the rabbit hole fantasy of the 1860s, who can say? Overture. And here we see a skull. You'll understand why in a minute. And the skull is saying, gravity's weird. Here we see central Prague. There I am in the corner. This is what Prague kind of looks like today. You got your Kafka burger and all that. And there's an astronomical clock. Hello down there. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the skeleton who graces the famed astronomical clock in Prague, where I've been ringing the hours since 1410, a little more than 66,357,553 times at last count. From my perch, I've seen it all. But nothing compares to what I witnessed between April of 1911 and July of 1912 in that souvenir shop across the square. Back then, it was the White Unicorn Pharmacy where every Tuesday, the poet, critic, and mystic Berta Fanta hosted Prague's best and brightest for discussion, Mozart, and strong tea, and where a frustrated patent clerk and an ambitious young insurance executive unexpectedly fell into each other's company. The patent clerk, well, as you no doubt guessed, he's Albert Einstein. But our 1911 Einstein is far from the sweatshirt sporting, bicycle riding, person of the century Einstein we've come to know and love. On the contrary, he's a financially strapped 32-year-old father of three who's had to drag his family here to double his salary, save his marriage, and most importantly, to salvage his foundering scientific legacy. You see, even though Einstein can put I came up with E equals MC squared on his resume, he can't land a job teaching high school in Switzerland. In fact, it seems the only people who pay any attention to his ideas are the ones who hate them, and with good reason. His 1905 theory of relativity stands on very shaky ground, and he knows it. In short, he's a nobody. And that note refers to a conversation I had with the head of the Einstein archives at Caltech, who basically said he was a nobody. And our rising insurance exec, meet Franz Kafka, age 28. And circa 1911, far from the cockroach-crowned, hooded-eyed prophet of modern literature, whose very name has become a byword for mechanized ennui and the robotic futility of modern life. No, our Kafka is a 6'2", nettily dressed go-getter in the booming field of workers' compensation, renowned for his work ethic, and even reputedly the inventor of the miner's hard hat. Terminally single, strictly vegetarian, and a fanatical pre-dawn lap swimmer. He's still living at home with his parents, and unless you count a couple of press releases, virtually unpublished. Another nobody. Nevertheless, by the time Einstein's train pulls out of Prague 16 months later, the physicist will have uncovered the key to what he called solving gravity, not only rescuing his legacy, but giving birth to what's been called everything from the most perfect intellectual achievement of modern physics to among the most beautiful and significant achievements of human understanding. And Kafka, well, by the end of 1912, he's produced his story, The Judgment, the masterpiece that cracked the code of the modern written word, launching a body of work that Philip Roth said stands, quote, as a monument to the power of literature to transcend time and place and to reveal the hidden depths of human experience. Nobody knows quite how they did it or why, but I happen to have assembled some pretty compelling clues. And as I said, I've seen it all. So pull up a chair and let me tell you how it all went down. And there I am on the very same train that Einstein, well, not the same, it's a little more modern, but it's the same line from Zurich to Prague. So I am going to close this, if I can, and go back to the Zoom and stop sharing the screen. And I think we're back in business. Hey.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I noticed one of your titles of your job description was questioner.
Yes.
So that made me think about the genesis of this project and was wondering what drew you to the idea of putting Kafka and Einstein together in this story and telling this story. And I wonder if there was a question that you were trying to answer at the heart of it, the way Einstein has a question he's trying to answer and Kafka has a question he's trying to answer.
Well, you know, I believe that truth is always stranger than fiction, except when fiction's stranger than truth. But you know, what made me write this story was when I found out that they actually cohabitated Prague at the same time, and that it was a super important year for both of them, and that they went to the same salon of the Sperta Fanta, and different people have written about their encounters in various different ways. And I thought, wait a minute, Einstein and Kafka, you know, my two heroes who I don't understand, you can't make this up. So when I found that out, the big question, Ross, that I had was something happened, and what happened? Because in 1911, when Einstein arrives in Prague, and believe me, I'm not a physicist. I'm a cartoonist, and cartoonists, as my late mentor Sam Gross said, cartoonists know everything, but I know just enough. And Einstein had problems. There were people on his case, I found out, and he had some things to prove, not scientifically and also in terms of his own marriage and his own life. Kafka had always had problems. It was as you know better than anybody else, 1911 was a very rich year, 1911 and 1912, for his diary writing. I mean, incredible. So I could track his struggles, and I think you'll agree that by the end of 1912, you know, he had published and already publicly read The Judgment. So something happened over that period, and it happened in Prague. And so I wanted to figure out what happened.
Right. They both had these significant breakthroughs at the same time in the same place. And so much of the power of this graphic novel is in the evocation of that time and place of Prague in 1911, 1912. And you call it Kafkaland. It's a kind of wonderland as well, with all the Alice in Wonderland references of falling down the rabbit hole. And your narrator is the skeleton from the astronomical clock in Prague, which I'll probably ask you to tell me more about. If you want to fold that into this answer, it's fine. But what do you think it was about the intellectual and cultural atmosphere of Prague at that time that either makes the story so rich, or even made these breakthroughs possible, or captured the imagination of these incredible figures?
Yes. Well, one of the things that I've always been driven to in my work, and that graphic storytelling allows me to do, is show pictures of the place. And as I might have mentioned, I was lucky enough to be in Prague during a lull in the pandemic. So in fact, people told me, Ken, you've seen Prague. It hasn't been that empty since Einstein was there. I mean, it really was empty. And I got a sense of the place as a character. But in addition to that, this was a very, very special moment in history, before World War I or the Great War. Prague was an outpost, an outcast city, but it was a growing industrial city. And I like that about it. It was to use, a $24 word, it was a liminal place. It was kind of, and the Czech Republic and Czechoslovakia is a liminal place between warring people. And there was a Jewish community in Prague that was kind of a majority minority, because they were German speaking, and Prague was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, one of the most messed up empires ever. But out of its refuse and detritus, a lot of great stuff happened. And so they had a little German. Well, they had two universities, even though only 10% of the people in Czechoslovakia were German speaking. They had an entire university, and that's where Einstein got his job. And Kafka was part of this fascinating German-speaking Jewish community that really birthed a lot of incredible people who went on to found, university in Jerusalem, and Max Werfel, who went on to write, the one about the woman in Lourdes. That was his book, and Max Brod, and on and on and on. So it was this ferment, and I just was taken with it, and I had to get there. And there's so many. Then you add to that the Jewish heritage and the non-Jewish heritage of Prague is kind of mystical, kind of woo-woo. I mean, the golem was created by the great rabbi of Prague. The cemetery in Prague is the most bizarre place in the world. I mean, the graves are 7 layers deep, and it's like Frankenstein. So it all came together. It all came together.
As you draw that, you have Kafka and Einstein walk through the cemetery, right? When they're walking.
Yes, I do.
Looking to see if I could hold up that, if I could find it quickly. Maybe I can't.
I don't know, for any of the listeners to the Zoom, it really is incredible. Also, Kafka is buried in the new Jewish cemetery, which isn't there. And of course, I visited his grave as well. And I just can't say enough about Prague. It's just an amazing place.
Extraordinary city. Let me say, I don't know if I'm even good at. I can't hold things up to the camera very well. Anyway, you have a beautiful image of their two faces, sort of surrounded by all the lopsided, crisscrossing graves of the overcrowded Jewish cemetery in the center of Prague. But yeah, so you imagine this. You have the historical fact of their convergence in this time and place, and then you imagine what it is. I suppose I could ask you to say a little more about your approach to this kind of graphic nonfiction narrative, which you've undertaken, in several different books now, of merging nonfiction with your own imagination, while grounding so much of what you're doing in facts. You're also able to take marvelous flights of speculation and imagination, and how do you approach
Yeah.
that role of
So
historical fact and
yeah,
imagination?
there's somebody once said that if facts were the only thing that were true, then for our older audience, then the Manhattan phone book would be the best book ever written, because it has more facts in it, than anything. And the difference between truth and facts is very subtle. It's woven in. And what I was dealing with here, my initial way in was that I was looking at Einstein not so much as a scientist, but as an artist, sort of a German expressionist. And that was validated in a lot of the research, where Einstein said, first of all, I don't really I think in pictures, I think in pictures. So I wanted to get the truth of the fact that the artist in Einstein and a bit of the scientist in Kafka, he was a student of philosophy. He was a doctor of law. He studied sort of with this. He was very influenced by Brentano and all this kind of thinking about reality. And I think his fiction, I mean, the way that I take his fiction, it's a completely different way of looking at storytelling. It's like storytelling as experience, and Einstein is like science is feeling. So how can I bring this across? So I look at all the true things, because I can't make up what really happened. I mean, what really happened was quite extraordinary. And then in the holes in the lecture, where in the record, or where people disagree, as long as I don't do anything that is either out of order or completely off, I use the interpretive power of pictures to relay meaning. And in fact, I learned this when I did my first book on Hannah Arendt, and she had this great expression. She says, storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it. And when I read that, I was like, yeah, that's what stories do. And if stories do it, pictures do it even more. Like, pictures reveal meaning without committing the error of defining. You can't define a picture. So that's the space that I play in. And the ground rules that I set for myself are different for each book. And not to get too far ahead of it, but in this book, the ground rules were, I'm going to try and explain some of Einstein's wacky theories using pictures, without using that example that we always see of a flashlight on a train, which I could never understand. I'm sure everybody kind of knows it. So I wanted to try and find fresh ways.
Right. Well, Einstein has, so I was just thinking while you're speaking, Einstein has, and you thematize this in the book, he has the Gedanken experiment, the thought experiment, and Kafka has these parables and these that are almost like thought experiments themselves. And you have your own version of an Einstein thought experiment. I think it's your own. It wasn't from research, right? The thing with the ball in the train.
Yeah.
Was that from research, or was it inspired by research, or was that your own thought experiment to illustrate one of?
Yeah. So let me describe that. It's a scene that I was going to show, but I wanted to get going on the conversation here. And when Einstein and his family take the train from Zurich to Prague, which I took, I have his son doing something that I used to do when I was a kid in the car with my parents. And actually, my editor for the book, Nancy, okay, a little bit of an aside, but kind of interesting. Her grandparents were Einstein's accountants. she relayed a story to me that Einstein kind of told about how, if you can understand this thing. So what it is it's the kid is tossing a ball up in the air. When I was a kid, I would toss a quarter up in the air. And when I'm in a moving car, right? So the car's moving 50 miles an hour, and I'm tossing the coin, but the coin is not, I'm not holding the coin. I'm tossing the coin. And in one sense, it's like, shouldn't the coin fly back? Because it's kind of not attached to me anymore, right? And I have his kid kind of do that, and then imagine throwing the ball so high that it goes over a mountain when the train goes through a tunnel. And the kid says, but the wind will blow it back. And he says, it's a Gedanken experiment. There's no wind. And it was only, and the reason I did this, Ross, was there's a concept in physics called inertial space. And I'm not, I don't want to have to say the words inertial space. I want to kind of show what it is, because it's a very important idea. Otherwise, when you're drinking a coffee in the plane, it would all fly into your face, But when you're in a space, everything responds. And that out of that comes his idea that each different person is in their own space. So you can't compare across spaces. I mean, the other thing, and you get more of it in Europe, as you know, when you're at a train station, and in Europe, in the train stations, all the trains are very, very close together. And there's a kind of a feeling of vertigo because you don't know if the train next to you is moving or you're moving.
Right.
Because we don't know. And that
actually the first line of Kafka's Diaries just came to mind, where he says, the spectators stiffen while the train passes. It's almost that image of motionlessness, standstill in motion, which preoccupied Kafka as much as ancient philosophers and Einstein. One question about you, I noticed you said you didn't want to use the word inertial space. It made me think about this relationship between words and images in your books and what your books are able to do that prose alone can't do. Do you think that point where you hit a term like inertial space or words that feel inadequate to do something justice, that's when you start picturing and visualizing the same way Einstein would reach for the thought experiment, Kafka would,
I wish it were that simple. When I was working on the book, in as much as I was basically thrown out of pre-med when I took calculus, they were like, no, don't become a doctor. I studied. I hired a graduate student at the University of Chicago to teach me physics, to help me understand this. And in the first draft of the book, I put all that, learning into the book. And my editor looked at it and said, Ken, you really kind of did learn a lot of physics, but take it out of the book. Do that Ken Krimstein thing where you kind of show it, And it was breaking my brain a little bit to try and do that. But, the thing that attracted me about these two guys was that their thinking is beyond sort of the bounds of normal reason, but we've all kind of taken it for granted. And Einstein's world, where light goes the same speed, no matter if you're rushing to it or rushing away from it or catching up to it, it always goes the same speed. It's incomprehensible. Just as Kafka's world, where a man turns into a gigantic bug, he doesn't say, and, nudge, get it? Right. It's like, this is a metaphor. No, he just presents it to you, as he does with things in burrows and a wall of China that extends forever. So, I felt compelled to show the human idea in this, so that, to try and at least make people understand a little bit of that fact that there is truth in this. Or as Einstein said, and I quoted in the book to one of his friends, Paul Ehrenfest, another physicist, he writes him a card at one point, and there's a phrase in there which I absolutely love. He says, Paul, I think I found a piece of the truth. And I love that. It's not the whole truth. It's a piece of the truth. Yeah.
And then you also have Kafka bring up this concept of the true truth that he's looking for.
Yeah.
As something they were both searching for. But I to shift gears a little bit, because you do present sort of these extraordinary minds of these extraordinary figures. You also make a real point of emphasizing their ordinariness and their humanity. As I think you mentioned in your presentation, there's a bit of myth busting that goes on, and it's not the iconic figures that you imagine, but it's Kafka swimming laps in the morning, or there's this whole kind of subplot that I enjoyed possibly more than anything else in the book about Einstein having to wear an Austrian military uniform for his for bureaucratic and official purposes to become a university professor there.
Yeah.
He has to go to this ceremony, this imperial sort of go through the motions, and one of the things is, and he has to pay for it out of pocket, so he's afraid to tell his wife, not only because of their money problems, but also because they're both convinced pacifists, and it's a military uniform with a saber, where he keeps saying sword, and then no, but it's not a sword, it's a saber. And
It's a saber. Yeah.
humor, of course, is delightful throughout the book, but also this impulse that you have to keep them human and emphasize the quotidian and the reality of these men as human beings, as not simply the icons, the myths. So what's your relationship with the myth of Kafka, the myth of Einstein?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to deal with it fresh. And there were many, many surprises. One of the things that I say often, Ross, is that Kafka did not know he was Kafkaesque at this time. He just was Kafka, and Einstein kind of didn't really know he was. I mean, he had a lot of belief in himself, but he was under a lot of pressure. And I think by showing the humanity of these people and, however you put it, scraping the barnacles off history or whatever, it makes them more extraordinary, but it also gives the audience, the readers, kind of the permission to think that they're not that removed from these people. They're human, warts and all. I love the fact that you picked up on the uniform thing, because when I read that, and it's in Philip Frank's biography, and Frank was the guy who succeeded Einstein in Prague. And when he tells the story, it's just extraordinary because, and this is where I'm really happy that I'm a graphic storyteller, because the image of Einstein, he referred to it as a Brazilian admiral's uniform. He said it himself. And the image of Einstein, this pacifist walking around in a full military uniform with a saber, it was just too funny. So then, to help, people understand, I wanted to find the uniform. I wanted to find it. And I had to ultimately, through, my friend Stu and other people, got to somebody who's like running the Imperial Archive, in Vienna. And they found it. They found the civil servant's uniform, not Einstein's, but the civil servant's uniform, because he was an appointee of the emperor, and the university was an imperial university. So he had to be inducted by, I love this, the Viceroy of Bohemia. The emperor could not make it there. And it's just incredible. And you can't make it up.
Really capture something of this imperial city at this, in these sort of decadent
its years, waning days. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
you capture that atmosphere.
Your audience, sorry to interrupt, but your audience might find this interesting, especially, as we're coming up on Passover. So when I was in Prague, somebody, or some of the reading or some of the research, I believe it was Kafka, who said we were 4-day-a-year Jews. And I thought, what? 4-day-a-year Jews? Let's see. You got Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Passover. What could the fourth be? Shemini Atzeret? I mean, what could it be? And it was the emperor's birthday. So all the Jews would go into synagogue to respect the emperor's birthday. At least that's what I heard. And I thought, wow, practical people, but also it's those nuances that, that made me understand the tenuousness of this connection. And I just want to add one other thing, that when I'm doing this work as a historian, I don't want to let my knowledge of what happened influence
Mhm.
how the characters are behaving. I want them to behave as they behaved.
Right, right. Yeah, so let's talk more about this relation. So most of the works you've done have a Jewish history thread going through them, as far as the ones that I know best. And this one certainly, actually, even in that story of the kind of induction ceremony as a civil servant, one of his Einstein's friend objects to the idea of doing that because they're both um, don't believe in religion, and you have to either what's the rule? You have to either profess a
Yeah, you
Christianity,
can't be an atheist. The
right?
emperor,
You
the
have to say
emperor
I'm
will.
the religion of Moses or something. Yeah.
Right. He says I'm of the Mosaic faith, and his
Hmm.
friend Paul Ehrenfest, he wants to give Ehrenfest the job when he leaves, and Ehrenfest says, I'm not going to do it, man. I'm not going to sell out. You and I were both, we believe in physics. And Einstein literally says in a letter to Ehrenfest, it's just a piece of paper, man,
Right. Yeah.
and he says, no.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. Yeah.
the Jewish angle, yeah, I mean, it's not, it's sort of Middle European Jewish, trying to explore it, because I guess it's questions that maybe I have myself about
Mhm.
assimilation and about that sort of stuff, and also that lost world,
Mhm.
and let me just say, spoiler alert, hopefully my next book will, be about rock and roll, and and not Jews and rock and roll,
I
just
wasn't
about
suggesting
something
that you should
else.
stop doing it.
Yeah, hopefully. But these three, I mean, yeah, the Hannah Arendt book was sort of uh the most current, and then the When I Grow Up, about the Yiddish teens between the war, was slightly older, and then this one is actually completely jumps the abyss and goes to the other side of the equation.
Mhm.
And I guess also here I am in Berlin, and I know you've been in Berlin too, and it's a very poignant place, because Berlin in the 30s, I didn't even know this. I mean, there were garment centers here, just like there were in New York. I mean, there were. It was it was so reminiscent to me of New York.
Mhm.
Uh, it's shocking. It was a major, obviously Jewish city, and the Jewish culture here in Germany was such a big contributor to great culture. So yeah, I guess it's just maybe I'm trying to work out some things in my own head as I'm doing
Sure.
this.
Yeah, yeah, and right now you're at the American Academy in Berlin. Do you want to say anything about what you're working on or what's coming next? And you're
Well, I'm working on too many things. I'm working on the aforementioned rock and roll biography to be discussed. I'm working on more of a personal memoir dealing with an act of pretty bad racial discrimination, housing discrimination that took place in my little hometown in Illinois, that was buried the whole time I grew up. It happened before we moved there, but the whole story of it, which actually went all the way to the, Supreme Court, we never heard about. So Germany is an interesting place to deal with that. And then I have fallen back into the rabbit hole of the Cafe Romaniche, which I absolutely adore. It was the hippest place in the world, where everybody hung out before World War II. And I'm drawing. There's a wonderful pop-up that they've made that recreates it, and I'm drawing. I'm obsessing with everybody from Thomas Mann to Emanuel Lasker to you name it, Marlene Dietrich, everybody who hung out there.
fascinating. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know when we're opening it up to audience questions. I suspect there may be a lot to cover with audience questions, but if it's not time for that yet, we could talk a little more about the book, about maybe your research process. I know you mentioned you were in Prague, and
yeah. You were asking, yeah, what kind of things why did I go there? Well, as I say, geography is destiny. And, I want to see how the street, it wasn't hard for me to imagine how kind of dark and scary and gnarly those streets would have been when they were just lit by gas lamps, because it's a winding maze of streets. And there were a couple of things that I was really that I wanted to see. So in every Einstein biography, there's the same anecdote. It's told in different ways, but it's the same. So the day he comes, or whatever, as soon as he arrives in Prague, they take him to his office. And it's well known that his wife wasn't really crazy about the move. She was Serbian. She didn't want to leave, so on and so forth. And Einstein, at this point, he wanted to salvage his marriage, and so he goes to his office, and it's a big office. He had a tiny nothing office before. It's huge, and the windows open up onto this magnificent park, and it's sunny. And he looks out at this park, and all the people in the park are like dancing and singing. And he says to the person, he says, "Oh my God, look at how happy, everybody is. I mean, my wife is going to love it here. Look, people are so happy." And the person goes, "Albert, sorry, that's not a park." He goes, "Really, what is it?" He goes, "Well, that's actually the lunatic asylum." And Einstein then responds with, "Well, those must be all the other lunatics who aren't studying, quantum physics." And it's written in every biography. So actually, the person who translated my book, the Hannah Arendt book, into Czech, which had just come out, was going to help me and show me around. I said, "Can you get me into Einstein's office?" And she said, "Yes." So I went there. It's now a classroom. And I stood by the window, and I saw the park, and I saw the place that was the asylum. And then I went over there, and I looked up at Einstein's window. And, these kind of things, for me, and the way I tell stories, are so crucial. And so that was just one of the many kind of discoveries that I had. And, like when I went to Liverpool, or I just went to Hamburg recently. I'm a big Beatles fan, and when I went to Liverpool and I saw the physical juxtaposition of John Lennon's house, strawberry fields, Penny Lane, and Paul McCartney's house, all of a sudden I understood. And when I was in Hamburg and I went to the Reeperbahn and saw where they started, you understand in a different level. And what I call traditional historians, or whatever, verbal historians, have to use their language skills, to get this across. I use my language skills too, but I can draw, so it helps.
Yeah, I mean, Prague really comes alive throughout this whole book. The imagery of the city, your skeleton narrator. You want to talk more about that, the skeleton narrator? And
yeah, sure.
When did that come into play for you? When did you realize the story was going to be told by the astronomical clock skeleton?
Well, when I was in Prague, I was pretty obsessed with that astronomical clock. It's hard not to be. And
Sure.
It's amazing. Every hour, yeah, crowds come, and all these sort of Disney-esque characters come out and ring bells, and it's beautiful. And there's a skeleton that rings the hour. And I was kind of, that was cool. And the fact that it's 600 and something years old, and it does overlook the Unicorn Pharmacy, Kafka's father's store, and just behind his store, the gymnasium where Kafka went, and just around the corner, two of Kafka's apartments. I mean, and the skeleton sees it all. And then I thought, how am I going to link all these disparate balls that I've got in the story? And, I was looking at a lot of old other comics, and I was thinking, and I'm trying to figure out, the narrative stance. And I looked at some old comics by this company called EC Comics, and they gosh, they had a show on HBO too, you might remember, where they had like a narrator who was like the ghoul or something. And I thought,
Okay.
oh gosh, yeah, you could have like the ghoul type narrator. And then I thought the skeleton. So that helped. Now, along the way, when you're doing these things, or when I'm doing them, so Thomas Edison, Kafka liked the Edison Cafe. Kafka was kind of an Edison fan, I think, and Edison makes 2 visits to Prague, one during this critical year.
Yeah.
And where does Thomas Edison want to go? Of all the things in Prague, he wants to go see the workings of the 600-year-old astronomical clock. How is it that this wooden clock can keep time within 1 minute a century? So I thought, wow, that's kind of amazing. So there was and also the skeleton allows me to get my authorial voice in there in a way, like, isn't that weird? Like I say, gravity's weird.
Right.
That's me. Gravity is weird. Ask a physicist. I mean, ask Brian Greene. He'll tell you gravity's weird.
Right. Yeah. And then, so the Alice in Wonderland overlay, with that at some point, actually, this merges into Alice in Wonderland for a few, and you signal to the reader these few pages, they're now actually just reciting dialogue from Alice in Wonderland.
Well, again, I think it was good that my skeleton could help pull it all together, but I guess I've always been sort of obsessed with Alice in Wonderland without reading it. Somehow, I read it, but I've just always been. And I sort of remembered that opening scene when Alice falls down the rabbit hole, right? And she's falling, but she's like, oh, I see there's a cup of tea. I'll take it. I want to grab a jar of marmalade. And because the tunnel's so deep. And actually, what Lewis Carroll kind of anticipates there is what Einstein calls his happiest thought, which he had to develop in Prague, which is that, and there will not be a test on this, but it's that when you're falling, you're actually standing still. That's that state of falling. That's, because if you're, he had this thought experiment, but, if you're falling and you take your keys out of your pocket and drop them, you're both going to fall at the same rate, because you're both free of gravity. Now, when you hit the ground, it's going to hurt, because that's when gravity comes in. So Carroll kind of hinted at that in that book. It blew my mind.
Wonderful. I think we're going to open it up to audience questions now. Sydney's going to lead us on that. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I want to thank both of you before we go into audience questions for this really excellent conversation. And just remind our audience that you can continue to put questions in the Q&A. But I want to start with a quick clarifying question, Ken. Did Kafka and Einstein ever actually meet? Do we know for sure?
So, aside from the fact in some biographies, which may have been, Philip Frank and Max Brod say that they did, and others, I looked at the definitive, and Ross, you'll know, Reiner Stock, I believe 1,200 pages, 1,300 pages, 3 volumes. And, it's a triple doorstop. And he does put them together on the night of Einstein's lecture to the Prague Jewish community, which is May 24th. So he has them in the same room, and he also has them at Fanta's Salon. Mm-hmm. So that's good enough for me. If it's good enough for Reiner Stock, it's good enough for me.
There you go. And so kind of another question that comes off of, because, they were only kind of together at these 2 points in time, was it difficult for you to kind of weave their stories together? Like you talk about how you have this kind of overall narrator, but was it difficult to find those things that came together?
You know, that's why I go and immerse myself, and I'm really, really happy that this was only 15 months. But so one of the things I did to help me understand this, because when I say geography is destiny, I don't just mean geography like geography class. I mean where we are in space and time. So that year, from July 1911 to August 1912, a lot of stuff happened in the world. And, you know, there was a global heat wave. The Oreo cookie was invented. The Titanic sank. The Mona Lisa was stolen right off the wall of the Louvre. The last Native American wandered out of the wilderness and made global headlines. So, you know, air conditioning was invented. All this stuff. The first baseball game was played at Fenway Park. They read the newspapers, these guys. They live in the world that we live in. You know, technological advances would have affected them, movies, so on and so forth. So I surmise that, and I know that Kafka was a big reader of American, you know, stuff, cowboy stuff, and Einstein. In fact, I have one funny moment in there that I speculate, but where their interest in America coincides with New Jersey. You know, all props to New Jersey. Right. I mean, Thomas Edison, who I used to be obsessed, and I went to his place out in wherever it is in New Jersey, and the first group insurance policy was written for a company in New Jersey, and Kafka would have probably known about that. So they say to each other, it's all happening in New Jersey, you know? So that's how I kind of, and that's just the surface level, because within the, they were at the same salon, and they went to the Cafe Louvre, and there were so many of this, they were in the same scene. Now, Kafka wasn't a musician, but his best friend, Max Brod, was. And Einstein was. He loved to play the fiddle. And that was kind of one of the reasons they put him into this thing, you know, and that's one of the, and I play some music, and, you know, I see this as the version, you know, the 1911 version of let's have a jam session, you know, so I could see that.
And you said that you were in Prague for 15 months, I believe.
No, I was only there for a month.
You were only there for a month, but can you talk a little bit about how long the process was from kind of start to finish of writing and illustrating?
Yeah, you know, the way I sort of surmise it, it was like 3 years. So it was like 1 year, kind of researching everything. And, you know, they all kind of go on at the same time, but 1 year kind of writing, and then maybe a year drawing.
And Ross, this is actually a question for you. But you know, as we mentioned at the beginning, you've translated a number of Kafka's works, and you continue to publish his translations. Did reading Ken's book kind of cause you to approach any of these translations differently, or open up any different ideas about Kafka for you?
I think I connected with a lot of, I think one of the things Ken said in his introduction was about subverting the cliche to get into the humanity of these guys. And I felt like a lot of my project with translating Kafka, the personal writings, the diaries, and the letters, has been to reveal the humanity as much as it's the humanity in a really intense literary form of writing. And so in that sense, there's a lot of maybe kinship between his approach to both Kafka and Einstein and my approach to Kafka, kind of getting behind the icon or before the icon. Maybe you see some of those features of the figures that are the origin of their iconic status, but you see them within the whole of the life and the ordinariness and so on. So as far as I'm concerned, yeah, I affirm a lot of the image of Kafka in this book. Yeah, but you know, I'd done the whole of the diary translation before this came out, and now I'm doing the letters, so it may spring to mind as I'm doing the letters. Um, but yeah,
for me, it was very fortuitous that the letters, Ross's version of the letters, came out when I was kind of finishing the book, because I love not the letters, I mean the diary, and because I love the diary. I mean, I had read obviously all the stuff and was rereading it, but the diary, not only because of that year, but the way he writes in the diary is just, he's working things out. You know,
right,
this is the creative process, which I love. And you can kind of
right,
track where he's making breakthroughs as they're happening. So it was,
right.
this is what I was trying to show in the
That's what you're
book.
doing in your book. Yeah, yeah. You're
Yeah.
doing the same. You're trying to
And when
track.
Ross's
Yeah.
translation came out, it took what is, for me, kind of my favorite writing of Kafka. It's hard to say what is, and it made it even better. You know, there's more of it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Ken, we have kind of one, I think we have time for one final question, but we've had you here to talk about your two previous books before, which you all should go check out those talks on our YouTube channel as well. But people are wondering, for those who haven't read Einstein and Kafkaland yet, has your visual style changed? Like, does it change in response to the topic that you're talking about? And did you have to change anything or kind of adapt things to get around these very complicated ideas that both of these men are talking about?
Well, it has evolved a little bit, and I used to use more digital tricks, if you will, stretching stuff and whatnot, drawing. Now, maybe in a response to AI, I don't know. I am working analog. I went out and I got the best watercolor paper that I could afford and ink. And you'll note, actually, on some of the pages, I made a real effort to use a wash, what they call a wash, where it's very watery, and you could see the natural flow of the paint. It felt to me like that was what Einstein would have liked, you know. And so I feel that to that extent, working analog on paper forced me. Now, the other thing is I have found, I haven't used it a lot, but one of the neat things about working in the graphic medium is that I can do diagrams. Like, I can break the story up and do like a, like a chart or whatever. Well, that was kind of helpful. Like, I have a scene in there where, to show that, falling is standing still, Einstein and Kafka are walking across a bridge, and Einstein says, and just to show you, how it works, I'm just going to pull this elephant out of my pocket and this peanut and drop them. So, I can, cartoons allow people accept fantasy. And by the way, just one last thing, as I was working on the book, Kafka's complete drawings came out, which many people know were kind of in Max Broad's estate, and now they're in the library in Jerusalem. And when I looked through them, I thought, holy mackerel. I mean, that guy, he was a great cartoonist. He really was. So for further research, take a look at that book and then look at some James Thurber cartoons from the New Yorker in the 30s. You will be kind of shocked.
Well, I want to thank both of you for this really excellent discussion and for answering all of these questions and for taking the time to be with us, and Ken for joining us from Berlin. We really appreciate it. And I also
Thank you.
yeah. And I also want to thank everybody who joined us out in the kind of internet verse.